Welcome to another episode of the Conveyor Podcast, where we talk to executive communication specialists and entrepreneurs to hear about their particular career path in leading people, building relationships, developing their communications and voice. And today we have someone who's a little bit different from some of the other guests we've had so far. We actually have a marketing strategy communication specialist here with guest Karl Schmieder, rhymes with meter. He's the founder at MessagingLab, a New York-based biostrategy, biotechnology communications company. He has a podcast of his own, the Grow Everything podcast, and I've seen it span everything from biology in makeup, which I was just listening to. I was hearing about software and biotechnology, pharma, agriculture, a wide swath. I don't actually know how to describe or where those camps sort of sit amongst each other. What I also saw with Karl is, the like sort of an agency or practice after my own heart with offers around providing pitch development, the biostrategy canvas, which is obviously a play on the business model canvas with Alexander Osterwilder. And so, thanks for being here today, Karl.
I mean, thanks so much, Quinn, for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And I think you captured the essence of it. And I would just say, you said you don't know how all these things get tied together when it comes to our podcast, Grow Everything. The way I describe it is, basically biology is infrastructure. Like the planet's infrastructure is biological. And it's one of these things that we tend to ignore because we're biological and we're so used to just extracting and taking from the planet without any regard for what that actually means. And we're moving into this world where we know how to engineer with biology and basically build at the atomic level, atomically precise objects. And you think about biology, we are biological beings, but biology works across all scales. So it's like the microscopic, submicroscopic to, gigantic killer whales, orcas, and then the biggest living organisms on the planet, redwoods, which are these enormous living objects, but also these crazy mushrooms that are miles big. So being able to take what nature has given us and engineer it in a way that we can apply it to solve basically any problem is an incredibly important technology. And for us, I feel very lucky that I work in this space and I help people tell stories about it. For us, what I say is the two most important technologies of this century are AI and biotech, or AI and biology. So that's kind of, you mentioned you didn't know how these things are tied together. They're tied together because they all either are done with biology or they impact biology in some way.
Well, I worked with a couple clients in food, and I grew up on a farm, so even just understanding where agriculture ends and food as a sector begins, and thinking about pharma versus software and medical potentially. So I know that using the idea of crossing the chasm, this idea that customer segmentation is about people who talk together. The best way to segment and go after a market is who are people that talk to each other. And so, well my sense is that your focus, your aperture is on biotechnology. And what I tell people with my agency is that I'm building a curiosity engine. I like working with founders who are taking something to market. It's definitely more broad that say biotechnology in your court, but is it sort of the idea that you are you have this belief that everything is biology based and will work with an exciting project no matter what it is related to that?
So it's interesting that you say curiosity based, because I feel like what we are doing is also, it satisfies our curiosity. Like my curiosity just happens to be around how do we take biological systems and improve them, leverage them to produce things, and then tell the stories of what that looks like. So I do think that we are also simpatico when it comes to like this idea of curiosity. It just happens that we focused on that area, and I can talk about how that happened, but I just find it to be something that's incredibly dynamic and, you know, really world changing. I mean, like what we're seeing right now is so much around AI. In biotech, there's been these discussions around, you know, when is AI going to have its chat GPT moment? You know, chat GPT moment, and everybody kind of knew what chat GPT is, even though it feels like those of us that use it are always trying to learn more. And there's an argument that says, well, the chat GPT moment was really COVID. Like the scientific community demonstrated it could come together and solve a problem very quickly and save hundreds of millions of lives. And then you can argue about, you know, whether that was effective or not. It was very effective. But the fact that, you know, people had, you know, vaccine candidates on the market in less than a year, and within a year there were effective vaccines, just shows the power of this technology and how quickly it can be spread widely. We can argue about whether that's a good thing or not. You know, there's ethical issues, a lot of that kind of stuff. Those are like the communications issues that we kind of get excited about. They're challenging, but you know, I think a lot of what we do is definitely driven by our curiosity.
I'm very curious about what makes biology unique, and you just touched on this. Well, what makes selling, creating relationships, communications in the biosector is unique. On the podcast I was listening to in prep for this conversation with you, I was hearing your host, a female. What's her name?
Iram Khan. Iram Aziz Khan. Yeah.
So I was hearing Iram talk about a seed deal. So this notion of working with a customer of yours to develop and position a seed deal. So like a proof of concept for anyone out there. And she articulated that this isn't just about revenue. This is about relationship architecture, which I think was really interesting, because communications is, at the end of the day, is all about relationships. And I think that when I think about biotechnology and why I have kind of strayed away from it, is because I think that there are these gigantic regulatory, large incumbent steps that take a lot of time and effort to construct, and a long lead time and overhead in CapEx and R&D. And so can you kind of paint a picture of the landscape of this sector and how it relates to communications?
Yeah, so I mean, you bring up a really good point, and I think that perception probably is very accurate, particularly when it comes to the biopharmaceutical industry. So the applications of biotechnology to develop medicines, because the pharmaceutical industry, you know, is very large and it's highly regulated. So getting a medicine to market takes a lot of effort. And, you know, almost every step of it, there is some form of regulation. And, you know, and that in turn makes it a challenge from a communications point of view, because if you've got a company that maybe has a discovery that they want to turn into a drug, there's going to be multiple stakeholders along the way that they need to communicate with. Some companies, they just, you know, will create a technology or a molecule, and then they're going to sell that into a bigger pharmaceutical company. And that, again, it becomes relationship building, but very specific in terms of like who at that bigger company is going to buy that product. Now, I would say that that's not unlike any other kind of product, you know, marketing. It just feels different because of the technology that's, you know, a part of it. Probably, I think you'd mentioned that you'd listened to an episode that had to do with the beauty industry. We see beauty as one of these industries that is already being very impacted by biotech for a number of reasons. But one is, you know, on the one hand, you've got this clean beauty movement or this natural beauty movement where people want products that are very clean and they want to know where the ingredients come from. And there's this perception that if it's natural, it's safer, cleaner, better. But we know nature is just as nasty as I don't know, humans are. I mean, nature produces some incredible poisons. Plants have these poisons, animals have these poisons that they develop naturally to protect themselves. But you can't grow enough trees, animals, plants on the planet to satisfy consumer need or consumer desire for natural products. The example I'll give is rose oil. Like 1 acre of roses maybe gives you like 100 milligrams of rose oil. Like it's an obscene number. Like there's other ingredients that are widely used that there's so much land, so much water that gets used to produce this product, and you just end up with this tiny amount of this active ingredient. Now imagine you're in Canada, I'm in the United States. The statistic is something like everybody lives within a mile on average from some microbrewery. Where I happen to live in Brooklyn, I've probably got 15 microbreweries and then like a 3-mile radius. Now imagine that those breweries, it's not totally analogous, but if you could take those breweries and they were producing that rose oil, you would no longer need all that agricultural land. So beauty actually is one of those areas where we're seeing this incredible interest in this technology, because you're able to produce natural ingredients very quickly and at a purity that you can't even get from plants. But then taking it further, you're able to create high performance ingredients that don't exist in nature, and you can produce them in these breweries. So again, your footprint is so much smaller, which is great for the environment. So now you can take that further. I talked about beauty, I talked about medicine. Now imagine you're able to take those technologies and apply them to things like construction. We know a company they grow bricks. There's a number of companies that are out there that have alternatives to concrete that are basically use the same kind of technology that these microorganisms that build coral reefs use. And if you're able to leverage that, then all of a sudden, you don't have like this footprint of having to, use all these kilns around the world that are firing these bricks and are adding CO2 and heat to the environment. So, I don't know what your question was. I think you wanted to get a sense in terms of like what it looks like. I just gave you like the broad swath, and
Yeah.
each one of those industries is going to have its own communications challenges based on who the end customer is going to be.
You're bringing up, by talking about those examples, you're bringing up, I'm almost thinking of layers of the stories that are being told in that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it kind of takes me to, it's not, the world doesn't exactly operate the way that we tell ourselves it operates, right?
Yeah.
And so reconciling that, but also moving forward ethically, moving forward in a way where like you allow the world to better operate underneath it, and then you persuade people or bring them along, and sometimes it doesn't match up, sometimes there's a delay. Rosewood is a great example. You're saying that there are entire sectors or products that are being sold to consumers, being marketed to consumers, that the reality is we can't produce it in the natural way that people might want to be where the demand for that story is. And so as a marketer, you need to reconcile that and also understand the limitations. And so how do you handle that every day?
Okay, so I'll describe like our business a little bit, and then I'll talk about that. So we're very lucky in that we kind of straddle two worlds, or several worlds. Two is probably limited, but generally, on the one hand, we're helping startups or well-funded startups that can afford to hire us, that have a story that they're trying to tell, and typically for them, the question is always going to be like, who is your audience? What is who's going to buy your product? And that has some challenges typically associated with it, in that many times it's a science founder who wants to talk tech. They want to tell their technical story. So we have to untrain them to move away from that technical story to end up talking about the benefits of their product. It's kind of for us, as sales people, marketing people, it's marketing sales 101. But for these tech entrepreneurs, these biotech entrepreneurs, it's something that's still very new to them because they are just so used to communicating to other scientists or other technologists where the language that they use with each other is very precise, and they hesitate because they know they're going to get shot down if they're not telling a good story. And so we often tell, especially, we often will tell to founders, you got to be willing to be a little bit of a cowboy. I hate to use that metaphor, but it kind of like you have to be a little bit more willing to put yourself out there in a way is going to feel uncomfortable and risky. So we help with that. The other side of our business is really large companies. So big companies that are trying to biologize a product, a process. Maybe they're trying to hit a net zero goal, but they're trying to figure out where does biotech fit into their stack. And so that's like a different kind of communications issue, because on the one hand, you want their story to be clear enough to the people that are on the other side, the founders that might have a technology. You want them to understand, hey, we're this big company, but we really want to work with you guys. And we really see the value in working with these smaller companies and helping us biologize our supply chains. So we kind of get the benefit of working with both the small companies who all want to work with big companies or become big companies, and then big companies that really want to look at the small companies for innovation, for for goals that they're trying to meet, for new products. And so each kind of has their own communications issues, and that's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about and solving for people.
So I started my agency as a ghostwriter. That's the main offer. I remember I was paying human transcribers to record combos just like this, paying hundreds of dollars to then go and read it and tease it out. And thank God
I was there. Yeah, I was there, by the way. I did the same thing.
And so you're hitting close to home around how you just painted the picture of the two types of customers you help. You help probably early stage founders, well-funded, but early stage founders who's probably spending time with the executive team or the entrepreneurs themselves on their essentially shifting from product focus. They develop something, they might have a patent to something, and now they have to go and make it compelling out in the market. And that involves a new skill set around, you said, this cowboy approach. The other thing you're talking about is corporate. So marketing teams, product leads, like maybe a little further down, a little higher up on the stack, really orchestrating from your borrowing from your products, orchestrating your marketing campaign, your marketing approach, which I think is lovely because there's lots of things you build, things you distribute, stuff like that integrates in that. The thing that I have had a challenge in my career as an earlier stage communicator is that I sell people on production, and then I tell them the message, like the messaging they get from working with me is the cherry on top, which quite often is the everything type of thing. And quite often the friction or the work, the labor, the emotional labor is like working with the client team to like shift, like teasing out and making them adopt, not that I'm giving it to them, that we're like facilitating the creation of better messaging together. These key messages that can then go and be cloned into every other campaign that they're doing elsewhere. And so my solution has always been, I'm your blue collar content producer, and by being around me, good messaging ideas will come about. But it actually sounds like you found a formula for, not just a formula, you've proven that you create value by specifically talking about messaging. What's the sausage making process for that?
I wish I could say it's the same for everyone. It's just not. I mean, but if I was going to say high level, it's, getting to know each other, really understanding business goals, what's a company trying to accomplish, um, really understanding the way the story is being told now, who the audience is, um, coming up with, new messages that, could be tested with an audience or that resonate better for the team. And then figuring out the best media to distribute those in. I will say that for a long time, and even today, I mean, we're like in this communications business, so a lot of people immediately assume or for us, you're a public relations agency. And I worked in PR for almost 10 years. Like that's kind of where I honed my chops. The reason why we're not a PR agency is because PR agencies always they generally solve communications problems one way, which is through media exposure. And when people come to us looking for PR, our question is always, what's the bottom line impact of doing this? And the reason they think PR is because they don't realize that there's this whole, huge possibility when it comes to marketing. It ranges everything from advertising to, direct to consumer marketing, whatever. It's like there's 100 different ways to engage an audience. So for us, it's really like understanding what it is, who the audience is and the way that they should be reached, and then coming up with messages and testing those messages in a way that they're going to respond to them. And then once that's set, once those messages are set, then we move into like what you're talking about, where it's like, let's create the content that is going to tell this story over whatever X period of time. If we're specifically working with like a CEO, a lot of times our goal with the CEO is to move them away from the day-to-day benefit story of their technology, and to move to a more future-focused, what is this industry going to look like when we're successful, and how do we bring people along with that success? So I'm not sure that that's like a clear way of like articulating the sausage making or what happens behind, the screen, but a lot of it is just listening, and then coming back with the ways that an audience can be engaged.
How do you structure that work? Like how do you develop the trust with the entrepreneur, using the example of the entrepreneur, where you're doing some very core basic strategy, usually to go from they've gotten to a certain milestone, product develops maybe, to we're going to market, and you're doing you're like restructuring some of the DNA by working on core messaging. And then I can imagine that afterwards you're like, let's try this out, and then I'm going to go prove it in the field, and we're going to get signal here and do an experiment. And then if that works, we'll like continue with that experiment. But what's an engagement like with that relationship with a new startup?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first your first question was really, how do you build the trust? And I mean, we do have a reputation on our marketplace because we've worked with some really nice companies over the course of over the course of this business. And even from the beginning, like I was always like, you got to get to trust really fast. And the way you do that is just by listening and demonstrating, that you have knowledge that is going to translate into something. It actually sometimes surprises me when, and I'm not sure if this happens to you, when someone signs after just like 2 or 3 conversations. And we have conversations with people where we're like, we're not really sure you should work with us, or, you're really trying to do something that isn't our fit or doesn't fit with our philosophy. And then there's times where we will really engage in the conversation to figure out if the fit is correct. One of our biggest successes was I always joke, it's a biotech company disguised as a hair care company. It's a company called K18 Hair. It kind of came out of nowhere during the pandemic. and became extremely popular with hairstylists, particularly those that work with customers who dye their hair a lot. If you're dyeing your hair a lot, you're exposing your hair to a lot of really pretty bad chemicals. And if you're someone who goes and gets your hair dyed every 3 months or 6 months, you're really doing a lot of damage to your hair. And this product, their first product that they developed, you basically spray it on hair and you end up with a virgin palette because of the technology. And it's a biotech product. And they're one of those where we kind of danced around each other a little bit, because I was like, what are you guys trying to do? Usually, and what they wanted to really deepen their science storytelling. They really wanted their consumers to understand the science behind their products, because they felt, and correctly, that this was going to be a differentiator in the marketplace. To go beyond like, oh, this is how, hair works and keratin works, but really going down to that molecular level and understanding the biology of hair. Sorry. So they were someone who they knew me because I'd written a book about the impact of synthetic biology on all business, and they liked the book. And when we first started talking to each other, I was like, you guys are kind of like different from who we normally work with. Mostly people want their story to be simpler. You want your story to be more complicated. But then we got to know each other, and I realized that anything that they did with our storytelling was going to be something that we could learn from and we could bring back to all biotech founders in the biotech industry. And that's really what happened. But it was probably like a series of 4 or 5 conversations, just getting to know each other and really feeling like we could trust each other, and then proposing a small project that we could demonstrate knowledge and skill and expertise for them to gain trust and engage us in a bigger, a larger engagement. I hope that answers your question.
It did. There's just so much to chew on there. It's good. What's changing in this in your world? So how long have you been doing this for?
Like a bit more, almost a little bit more than 25 years. It feels kind of crazy to say that, but I started off, like I said, in PR, working for big pharma and doing kind of big pharma related, PR. And then ended up working at a smaller agency where it was just like lots and lots of writing, and mostly with biotechs, which is very exciting. But then at a certain point, I decided I really wanted to go do my own thing with that focus on biotech, but kind of got sucked into, and it was a good thing, into digital marketing, and then ended up being a kind of a early employee on 2 digital healthcare companies. But I really my heart was in biotech, but really like a broader application of the technology. And that I started to see probably in the early 2000s, where people, like, the conversation was shifting so that it wasn't just about healthcare or agriculture, but people were looking for these other applications. I had started as a freelancer in the early 2000s, went back in-house, did these digital health companies, and really started this version of MessagingLab in like 2014-ish. So I've been doing it for a while, and I've seen, some industry change. And you asked me about industry change. I mean, it's interesting because there's been, on the biopharma side, there's been this, they call it the biotech winter on the investment side. It's been a very challenging market. And right before the pandemic, healthcare biotech or biopharma was seeing larger investments than they had ever seen. On the other side of it, which we could broadly call bioindustrials, you saw a ton of money flow into alternate proteins and food tech, and then that dried up really fast. Like, they are very challenged right now.
The Beyond Meat sort of like Hindenburg, it seemed.
Yeah. So that stuff continued, but what the last couple of years have really shown And right now we're kind of also going through a kind of a different funding challenge in that a lot of university funding is being pulled across the board, which long-term is going to have a huge impact, because what I think a lot of people fail to understand is those investments in basic research end up turning into businesses, and those businesses are the technologies that we use every day. So GPS, everything that we carry around on our pocket, the supercomputer, came from basic research. And so not investing in that, is a huge mistake from the kind of America political point of view right now. But what we've seen is that despite the funding challenges, the technologies continue to expand and develop exponentially. And like AI applied to biology, and this convergence of technologies, this super convergence of technologies, is really going to be a game changer. And I mean, I don't say that lightly, but I just see like the way that people are using AI to engineer organisms, to improve processes, and it is just astounding.
So from a
Oh no, I'm the cougher.
that's painting a very clear picture of biotechnology, and I'm very with you. I'm so with you. I hear from smart Silicon Valley investors, they say that one of the most underrated things that's going to be a big difference in the next 5 to 10 years is how medieval medicine and the increase in personalization, CRISPR, the rapid decrease in price in genome sequencing, even just things like personalization of orthotics with 3D printing versus mass produced stuff. It's incredible. But so clearly biotechnology growth sector. You did paint a picture of some cautionary risks. So some secular headwinds of the pipeline drying up from early stage stuff at universities being a bit fallow, and then in 5 to 10 years there won't be as many commercial ready IP that's able to go to market, and that might be a challenge both for corporates but also startups. So hopefully something kind of replaces that a little bit, or it picks back up. But what about what about communications in general? So I'm trying to build a thesis on how folks build relationships professionally, get their message out, market. And AI, as much as you're excited about it being promising for the evolution of biotechnology, I am equally as optimistic, but also concerned about the dramatic changes that are happening in marketing and communications in AI. So what are you observing? What's changing? What are your customers? How are they being affected?
It's like such a huge question. I mean, everybody's using it at some level, and I think what it does from a marketing point of view is you have to know your audience better than ever. I think that really becomes the key, and really understanding where they want you to where they want to meet you, or where they want to be met, and where you can meet them. And I think AI might make it easier to do that, but I think on a certain level, personal relationships and face to face is going to become even more important than we've than we. I mean, it was the only thing in the past. I think AI and what we do online enables us to initiate those relationships, but I think like so much more business is going to just be done face to face, while all these agents are working around us doing other things for us. So I mean, look, we use AI every day. Like, I've got a writing stack that I use. I'm finishing a novel right now that I wrote many years ago, and I'm rewriting it with AI and a human editor. And I've developed like a series of prompts that I use on a regular basis. We've got on our team, we've got someone who does a lot of our online content. She generally generates it in AI, but she's got like a prompt stack that we've developed together so that it has our voice, so that it has it says things the way we want them to be said, but they're always checked by a human. Either me or Iram were the ones who are looking at these things, because we want it to still come across as authentic. I mean, you can tell AI writing, but it's like, and there's a lot of ways to cheat around it to make AI look like it's not AI writing, but that level of authenticity, and we do it for our clients too. It's like we want them to get that and to understand that this is just a tool. You can abuse it or you can use it to your benefit, and it can be very useful. But from a communications point of view, I just think it's going to continue to just change the game. We just have to be on top of it and understand how we can leverage it. And yet at the end of the day, everything's still going to come down to what those personal relationships are. How does your audience want to be engaged?
A lot to chew on there for sure. I think that, so just to reiterate what you're saying there, AI is, so there was a really good article by a VC, I think it was a New York-based one, who tends to put out zingers, but he said every marketing channel sucks right now, basically. And it's because there's this giant etch-a-sketch. The playbooks have literally been like shaken up. And so what I'm finding it challenging to say is we don't know what it's. There's less certainty when you're talking to clients about saying what's going to work. I think, which that's always been the issue in marketing. It's not like building a house, but it's just the elephant in the room is obvious, I would say. And what I always say to clients too, or one thing that I was saying is there's this quote where it's like, the next war, I don't know what the next war is going to be fought over, but the war after that is going to be sticks and stones. So it was like, there was a quote about like atom bombs and who knows what else. And so you said earlier in answering this question that knowing your audience at a high level, so really segmenting and doing that research at a high level for arm's length, for scanning your industry, understanding where things are going. But what I basically say, because I work with mostly individuals within companies, like the actual entrepreneurs, I say, who are your core relationships? What's your Dunbar number? Who are the 150 people that you want them to know? You want them to know this is what you do. This is what you're trying to do. You care about them. You have a trusted line of communication to them, and like, what's your outer circle and what is the like outer circle from there, and how are you refreshing it constantly?
Yeah, I resonate with that 100%. I totally agree. I mean, we were just having a conversation with a potential client a couple of days ago, and that was one of the questions. It's like, who are who's your core audience? Who's your number one influencers? What kind of stories are you guys telling them, and how do they react to them? And if you start telling this kind of story, do you have enough of that audience to react honestly to that story before you go out? So I completely resonate with that idea of, your Dunbar number, because what is that, like 150 people? It's like a small number, but like that's the core that you really want them to be on board with you all the time, or have them be honest with you, where if you stray, they'll tell you.
Yeah, and I think also just stakeholder mapping is another thing too. It's like, who are your employees? Who's most important for making things work? And if the ship is going to be going through some rocky weather, then it's both defensive and offensive to like, what do your employees need? If you're remote, make sure that you're like proactive about culture. You're proactive about engaging them like mentally, rather than 1,000 helping hands or 100 helping hands type of thing. Investors, making sure that they that there's trust there. You're not depreciating, you're not taking money and then they don't know who you are type of thing. Your current customers and your future customers, and then your industry. You're like being able to get the birdies, the canaries coming in, so that what giant shifts are happening. The problem is, though, that I'm finding still, going back to sort of this marketing elephant in the room, is you can do that mapping, but you do to stay in touch with them, because their everyone's attention span is so sapped. So what's the emails are kind of the thing, but those are getting extremely saturated. Organic social, the toll gates are going up and it's getting more expensive. My answer is usually volume. Is just like
Yeah.
more spaghetti, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would disagree with you on that one, because I just think volume has its place. But then on the other hand, it's like, is that volume contributing to noise? If like you figure out that there's a certain way that your audience wants to be communicated with, frequency, I mean, look, frequency is super important, and every market, every company is going to have its own frequency that it should communicate with. It's a super interesting question, because like you're like, I agree with you on, like, on email, and we have this debate internally. Like, I'm always like, okay, so these people are coming in, they should just get like an email sequence that tells them what we do, and like, let them learn about us. And then the argument from Iram is like, well, no one reads emails. I'm like, that's true, they don't, but like they're getting these things from us, and they, maybe they don't read them, but the headline's interesting, and so they see that we're like making this effort, even if it's maybe not 100% tailored to them, but it's like background information. But then again, is that noise? So I think that there's like this fine line that we're all walking. I mean, that's why, like, people are crashing out, because they just like, there's just so much. And so I think at the end of the day, it really becomes, how does your audience want to be communicated with, and what's the best way to do that? Like, one of the things that we're having this conversation, we're talking about podcasts. Like, I haven't had anybody say to us, hey, will you create a podcast for our company that tells our company's story, which I think would be like a brilliant thing to do. Because like, if you're going to go engage with a customer and you're like, oh, you guys don't know us, we've got this mini podcast series that's like 6 episodes about what we do. Why don't you check it out? And I think that there's all these, AI makes it easier. It's not easier if you don't know that these are possibilities, but like, there is all these possibilities that perhaps are more enabled with AI. But I think at the end of the day, it really still comes back to the audience, how they want to be engaged, and and then the relationships you have and want to develop.
You brought up 2 interesting points talking about email, and I've made this argument with clients. I'm like, we want to run into people in the hallway, in their professional hallway. And so at the end of the day, there was this app maybe 10-15 years ago that it was called Yo, and they got $1 million in seed funding. I saw on TechCrunch, and this was back when $1 million was decent for SaaS. And Yo, all that Yo was you could follow, say, Radiolab, like a podcast, and the only thing the app could do was text Yo. Like, it was a single, and so
yeah, I remember this.
So it was like an electrical impulse. So I say that the emails are good because you are reminding people you have that relationship with them. It doesn't actually matter if they read it or not. It's more just, they might be able to read it in 6 months and they don't mind deleting it up until that point. And then you bring up this other point of leaving the artifacts. So the history, here's why the company exists. So invest in evergreen stuff and leave the artifacts so that so people can go and fetch that information as needed. And then that's
I mean, there is that thing too, that if you don't know your audience well enough, I mean, what's the Google rule? 7, 11, 14 or something like that. I should look it up so that I always get it wrong. It's like, engage people in 7 channels over the course of 11 hours, or some, I'm just going to look it up while we're doing this, because I want to get it right. It's like 7, 11, 14, you want to have 7 hours of engagement across 11 touch points in 4 different locations. So again, this is really, it really depends on your audience. Like, do you know that your audience is on Reels, or, on X, or in LinkedIn? Where does your audience hang out? Where else can they find you? Do you have a blog? Are you in Substack? are you on YouTube? Which of those places are you giving people the content that's going to reach that 7 hours of engagement so they know you? And Google has, found that that's like their formula. And I'm sure that there's a lot to be said for that. We end up talking about it, even though I never remember the numbers the right way. But it's another way to think about it. Like, now, again, I mentioned we had this conversation with a potential customer that, they want to improve their science storytelling, kind of like the way that K18 did, but they have like a core audience. And so I think going to what you're saying in terms of like, what is the Dunbar number? I think that would be the place where I would want to start with them. Is like, who are your super fans? Like, let's create this content that is going to tell your story in this new way. Let's trickle it out to them first, see what kind of reactions you get so that we know that this is working. And then we, create the artifacts that are going to live on your website or on Reels or wherever, where we know other people are going to engage with it. And they might not engage with it right away, but over time, that message is trickling out there for you.
What I think we're rounding the bend here. What sort of stuck out through this convo for you? Well, what interesting points do you think we could summarize this chat with?
Look, I think like the big things that have come out between us is, know your audience and understand what the touch points are to reach them. And by knowing that, that's where you can start to engage them. And if you don't have a story, you're going to have to figure out what that story is. But engaging and testing is always a big part of this. Before we started recording, we were joking around that like, most people don't think about comms or marketing. It's kind of like an afterthought, where it's really, to me, communications is everything. And I don't say that just because I'm a communications person. It's, it is the reality of our world right now. It's like, if you're not able to tell a good story, you just fall into the noise. And so being able to, tell a good, engaging, emotional story to an audience is the number one skill set right now. No matter what technology you're using, whether you're in biotech, AI, or anything else, that ability to tell a story is really the key.
As maybe one more question too. So one thing that I find is agencies have a hard time marketing themselves. And it looks like you're doing a fantastic job, and you invest in this, particularly with the podcast, I think. So what, maybe either for the podcast or in general, how do you think about marketing yourself? What have the results been? Because I find that a lot of agencies, a lot of it's relationship and referral based, even though they are doing marketing that isn't relationship or referral based.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for saying that about us. I always feel like we're okay at it. I mean, I think everybody has a different view of how they market their agencies. I invested a lot of money in sales training when I started the agency. I felt like I was really good at going into meetings and helping close a deal, but I wasn't that good at doing it for myself. And so the podcast wasn't really meant as a sales tool. The podcast was really meant to be something for our community to hear the conversations that we were having with people so they could get exposed to more of that. It has slightly become a bit of a sales tool in that, sometimes a potential client will say, oh, I listened to this episode and it sounded like you were talking to me. And we have done several episodes that are very focused on a certain marketing task. But it has kind of increased our breadth. And we get a lot of inbound for people who want to be on the podcast, not so many that want to work with us. So there's a balance there. But in terms of marketing the agency, to me, it's sales. And so I've got a list of, my Dunbar number of people who I stay in contact with, and I'm adding people that I would really like to work with to develop relationships with them. So that's like if I was a different kind of salesperson, that would be the cold list that you're trying to warm up and to get in front of. But I think, for an agency, yeah, absolutely. It's going to, at the beginning, like I think that they say that at the beginning of your agency, the first year and a half or 2 years are really going to be based on your relationships. So after that time, you have to be able to like develop other relationships and know that you're going to do that. So you have to invest time in it. So I try to spend at least an hour a day, on relationship building, something related to marketing. I used to have a sticky note on my desk that said one more call, which is like a kind of a sales reminder, before you leave your office, make one more cold call. I'm not really good at doing cold calls, cold emails. Sometimes on LinkedIn, I'll reach out to people. But it's always under the guise of, hey, I'd like to get to know you. Let's figure out, if we can develop a relationship. Like I'm one of those people, if someone like tries to sell me on that first, LinkedIn text or whatever, I'm just like, you know what, I can't take you seriously because you don't know me. You have the opportunity to get to know me. I'm very public. But I think for agencies, you have to have that combination of personal relationships, relationship building, and then also the dream list of the people that you want to work with.
Really great chatting with you, Karl. Thanks so much for telling me about MessagingLab, your thinking behind professional communications and strategy. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Quinn, for having me. I'll just say, if you want to find me, I'm pretty easy to find. It's either messaginglab.com or listen to our podcast, Grow Everything. It's on all the streaming channels. Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
This has been the Conveyor Cast.